In this episode, I'm going to explain why a personal relationship with God is essential if you want to continue to move forward in your personal growth, and the role that Christ plays in establishing a personal relationship with God. No matter what your belief systems are, I think you're going to find this episode pretty profound. And admittedly, I did not grow up in a religious family. I don't consider myself aligned or associated with any particular religion or spiritual belief. But I'm going to share with you this because it has been an absolute game changer for me in terms of having faith in my life, having more peace, having more calm, and ultimately creating prosperity and abundance and living my purpose and creating a life that I love. So let's start with the idea that a personal relationship with God is essential if you want to achieve the most out of your personal growth. So I was having a conversation with one of my private clients. We were in Antigua, Guatemala, and I've shared this story on other episodes. He was talking to me about how he was transforming the limiting belief of not being good enough into being good enough. And he was sharing with me all the evidence that he was finding in his life that he was good enough. And he was really, truly seeing that this idea that he wasn't enough didn't make any sense. And the work he was doing was fantastic. And as he was explaining this to me, I said, listen, Scott, you're ready for the next level, which is getting out of the not enough or enough conversation completely. And he said, well, how do I get out of that conversation completely? And I explained to him that you get into personal growth and it's like you're standing in a garden and you start pulling the weeds of your limiting beliefs. And when you've pulled enough of the weeds, you can kind of see a clearing above you, and all of a sudden you can see the sky and you move into a completely different conversation. He said, what's that conversation? And I said, what is God's will for me? It doesn't matter if you're good enough or not good enough, if you have enough time or you don't have enough time, if money is hard to make or money is easy to make. Transforming a limiting belief into an empowered belief or decision, you start moving into a higher vibrational question. What is God's will for me? And what we find with people who eliminate enough of their limiting beliefs is that they find spirituality and a relationship with a God of their own understanding. And this is a phenomenon that we've been able to experience. We've had over 10,000 coaching conversations in our organization, and the people who have really stayed in the work long enough, who really start to progress in their life, all start building a personal relationship with God. And this was an essential part of my addiction recovery, a relationship with a higher power that allowed me to surrender, allowed me to let go of the things that I couldn't control in my life, and not just let go of them to some sort of chaotic universe, but to let go of them to an infinite intelligence, a source that I believed was a loving source that was working for my greatest growth, my greatest prosperity, and my greatest evolution. All of the things in my day-to-day life that I couldn't control, I could let go of and trust that a power greater than myself was working a solution. And we have a prayer in 12-Step Recovery. It's called the Serenity Prayer. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, it's a really simple statement, but that third piece is the tricky part, the wisdom to know the difference. But it was only through building a relationship with a higher power of my own understanding. And that was my entry point into a relationship with a higher power. And that's what makes 12-Step so acceptable to so many people like me who didn't grow up with a religious background, who didn't grow up believing in God. You can define what your higher power is to you, but having a relationship with this higher power allows you to surrender in your life, to surrender my addiction and to surrender all the things that were happening on a day-to-day basis that were creating this backlog of accumulated stress and anxiety and overwhelm and anger that was really the emotional constipation that was leading me to drinking and drugging and sexing. So it was through a relationship with my higher power that I was able to let go of control and trust that life was always working for me. And without that, without a relationship with a higher power, what I've seen is that most people become a personal growth junkie. They go to the events, they go to the seminars, they jump up and down, they get into state, they get really excited for a while, but ultimately they go back to their same life without the spiritual connection. Now, that's not to say that people who have a spiritual connection don't experience the same merry-go-round in personal growth. But if you don't have a relationship with a higher power, and again, there's no judgment here. I'm not saying you have to have a relationship with a higher power. I'm just sharing my experience going from drug and alcohol addiction into personal growth and where I feel like I am now, which is going beyond personal growth. My observation is that when I didn't have a relationship with my higher power, and so many of the other people that I see in personal growth who come into our community that have not established a relationship with a higher power, it's very easy to still hold attachment to so many things that you're trying to control that you can't control because there isn't a source or a phenomenon outside of you that you trust is working to create a solution. And so whether that's trying to create financial prosperity and abundance for yourself, or whether that's trying to solve a chronic health condition, or whether that's trying to manage your business, what we end up doing is trying to control things that are not meant to us to control. Those things are meant for life to resolve, and as a result of that, we create insanity in our lives. We end up burning out, we end up hustling and grinding, and even if we produce the result, we're too burned out to actually enjoy it. And so there are still limitations in your life as a result of not being able to turn over or surrender those things that you can't control when you don't have a relationship with a higher power of possibility or a God of possibility, a higher power that can accomplish anything, meaning those things that you cannot accomplish, or a God who can accomplish anything, meaning those things you cannot accomplish. The second point is that this relationship with a higher power of your own understanding must become personal. So I did not have a personal relationship with God for a long time. In fact, it was really only up until the last, I'd say 18 months that I started being curious about a personal relationship with God. I had a relationship with the universe. Now, in my videos and in my episodes, I talk a lot about God or the universe or Jesus or Allah. And I get a lot of people, in particular Christians, who criticize that. Who suggest that, I'm spreading a false dogma or creating false idols. Some people even say, I'm going to burn in hell for it. The reason why I create an open funnel in most of my episodes is because here all are welcome, none are judged. Whatever relationship you choose to have, whether it's a relationship with the universe or with intelligence or with the quantum field or with Jesus or God or Allah or whatever it is, or relationship with nothing, you're practicing an Eastern tradition like Buddhism or Taoism where there is no God, you're welcome here. I'm sharing my own experience. And in my own experience, I found that there's a big difference between a relationship with the creator of the universe and the creation, meaning the universe. Now, I'm still going to continue in all of these episodes, encouraging people to build a relationship that they choose works best for them. And if you want to have a relationship with the universe as opposed to a God, and again, we're just using language to describe a phenomenon, that's okay. But over the last 6 months, having been asking for 18, I started developing a personal relationship with God. I transitioned from the universe to a personal relationship with my higher power, which I call God. And I discovered this through a journaling process. Now, I have this in another episode if you want to check it out. It's my episode on journaling. Very easy for you to find. You can Google it, or you can YouTube it if you're watching on YouTube, or you can check the episodes if you're watching on my podcast. But essentially what happened is I had this inclination that I should be getting up early in the morning and writing. And I didn't know what I should be writing, and I got really clear signs. And finally, when I got the third sign, I was like, look, I don't have to get hit over the head to follow the intuition. I will get up in the morning and start writing. And I started journaling. And in my process, I started journaling 3 very specific things. I call it communion journaling. The first thing is I start out by writing, Dear Father, and I thank God for all of the wonderful things that are going on in my life, acknowledging that without a higher power and without God, I'm really nothing. If I look at all of the things that I cherish in my life, from my wife to my son to my business to my community, none of it could have happened without God. If I look at it from a probabilistic standpoint, it's infinitely improbable that I would meet my wife, and yet I did. It's infinitely improbable, the gift of creation that we have through the birth process, yet there it is. It's infinitely improbable that we would even be existing on a planet with the perfect percentages of noble gases and the way that the global ecosystems work to, balance the amount of carbon dioxide and oxygen, yet here we are. Hey, it's David. Quick announcement before we get back to your episode. Our annual event, the Powerful Living Experience, is coming up. There's a link in the show notes, or you can visit powerfullivingexperience.com. Check out the video of last year's event. We're going to be bringing together 1,000 impact-driven entrepreneurs, leaders, and game changers to spend 3 days doing what matters most. Going really, really deep on identifying the limiting beliefs and subconscious programs that are still preventing you from your full potential, and going through deep experientials and trainings and transforming them. We're also going to be getting into concepts like wealth creation, purpose, greatness, money, relationships, health. And if you're an entrepreneur, we're going to be spending about 20% of that event opening up my business playbook, the same strategies and tactics and techniques that we use to go from $0 to $30 million in an impact-driven business, while spending 90% of my time doing what I love. There's nothing like the Powerful Living Experience. Inc. named it a top 3 must-attend personal development event for entrepreneurs and leaders, and I want to see you there. We've got some discounted tickets right now, plus some additional bonuses. Again, all the information is in the link in the show notes, or you can jump on over to powerfullivingexperience.com, get registered, and I will plan on seeing you there along with 1,000 other impact-driven, incredible members of our community for 3 days that you will never forget. And now, back to your regularly scheduled episode. And if I look at something like this podcast, I could take credit for it. I could say, well, I recorded an episode, every week for 56 weeks, and then all of a sudden it took off on YouTube. But I never could have done that if, the microphone had been invented, if YouTube hadn't have been created, if the internet hadn't have been created. Like, all of the things that had to happen in order for me to have anything that I have that I cherish from a mathematical standpoint are infinitely improbable, yet here they are. And so I thank God for everything. And I feel like I'm truly thanking the God of my own understanding. It's a personal relationship when I'm writing in the morning. And then I start asking for things, just like my son asks for all kinds of things from me. And I feel as I'm asking these things, because I'm asking my God of possibility, my God that I believe loves me, and I have so much evidence over the course of my life that this is true for me, that the things that I'm asking for are already done. And so now I'm tapping into some very advanced personal development principles, in particular what Neville Goddard talks about, one of the great mystical teachers of the early and mid 1900s. Acting as if the wish is already fulfilled. I have other episodes where I talk about this, like creating from the fourth dimension. But I'm asking as if it's already done, and I truly feel that. And then the third thing that I do is I pray for other people, and I feel that the things that I'm praying for are already done, because again, I'm in a personal relationship, a personal vibration or frequency with the God of my own understanding, and so I believe that these things will occur as long as they are God's will. And the most profound realization I had from this writing process that has helped to build a new neurology, a new nervous system for me, a nervous system that is in a personal relationship with the God of my own understanding, is that I also realized that a lot of the things I had been wanting my father to be for me, my dad could never be for me. Yet I wanted him to be that. I wanted my dad to have unconditional love for me. But that's impossible, because my dad had conditions. He had the conditions of providing for our family. He had the conditions of his relationship with my mom. He had the conditions of all of his unprocessed trauma and his limiting beliefs. And so all of my life, I had been seeking a kind of love from my father, not realizing that he could never give me that love because he lives within conditions. And only in beginning to establish this personal relationship with God have I been able to find that love, because God has no needs. God is the only place I can go to for that unconditional relationship and that personal relationship. And so in that, I find safety, security, peace, and possibility, which is really, really important. If you look at personal growth principles, it's very important to be living in a down-regulated state, a parasympathetic expression of your nervous system. That's where you have health. That's where you have ideas. That's where you're resourceful. That's where you can be present for other people. And that's an almost impossible thing to do if you don't feel safe. And I think so many of us are living with an unsafety that we experience as a result of the conditionality of the relationship with our parents, thinking that relationship was supposed to be unconditional. And for me, it's brought me back into a personal relationship with the only place that I believe you can have an unconditional relationship, and that is in a personal relationship with the God of your own understanding. Now, the third piece here is the role of Christ in the personal relationship. So Christ as man gives us access to something very, very important, and that is the personal relationship. Now, if you can establish a personal relationship with a thing called God, by all means, fantastic. If you can establish a personal relationship with a thing called the universe, by all means, fantastic. I am not here to judge. I do feel like I have a personal relationship with God, but what I also recognize is that Christ gives access to the personal relationship. Now, let me elaborate on this. Christianity, in its purest form, from my perspective, and you don't have to agree, I'm sure this episode is going to have a lot of people disagreeing with me about a lot of different things that I've said. But from my perspective, Christianity in its purest form is a religion of loving devotion. And that's actually something that I got from David Hawkins. He said the tradition of the Holy Grail, pure Christianity, is a tradition of loving devotion. And he compares that to the Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Taoism and says those are not traditions of loving devotion. Those are traditions or philosophies of non-attachment or acceptance of the dualistic nature of reality or desiring to live a non-dualistic type of perception of life. And those are great philosophies that need to be incorporated into a loving devotional relationship with your higher power. Taoism, Buddhism, for example, in particular Buddhism, remind me of the parable of the wise farmer. And if you've never heard it, there's a wise farmer and an ignorant neighbor. And the wise farmer has a horse that runs off one day. It escapes from the corral. And the ignorant neighbor says, "Oh, what a terrible thing that's happened. You've lost your only horse." And the wise farmer says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" A few days later, the horse comes back with a whole group of wild stallions. And so now the wise farmer has a bunch of horses. And the ignorant neighbor says, "Oh, what a wonderful thing that's happened. Now you have a whole stable full of stallions." And the wise farmer says, "Well, who knows what's good or bad?" And a few days later, his son, his only son, is out riding one of the horses and gets thrown from a stallion and breaks his leg. And the ignorant neighbor says, "Oh, what a terrible thing that's happened, that your son has broken his leg." And the wise farmer says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" And a few days later, there's a big war that's taking place. And so the military comes and gathers up all the able-bodied young men, but they don't take the son, and all of the recruits are going to go off and be killed in this war. And the ignorant neighbor says, "Oh, what a wonderful thing that's happened. They haven't taken your son off to war." And the wise farmer says, "Who knows what's good or bad?" Right? These are principles of acceptance. These are principles about being what is, and these are principles that we learn from Eastern tradition. But Christianity is a tradition of loving devotion. It's this idea that we praise a God, that we have a God who is loving us, and we are able to put a face on God as God who walked the earth, right, in the form of Jesus Christ. And so we are in loving devotion of God and the Son and the Holy Spirit, right, depending upon how you approach Christianity, because people approach Christianity in a whole bunch of different ways. And there's a slight distinction here, and I'm certainly not an expert compared to Islamic traditions for the most part, although there are exceptions. Muhammad is not widely viewed, right, in personal form or depicted, not exclusively, but for the most part. So there's not a personal relationship, nor is there a claim that Muhammad was God on earth, but rather a prophet, just as Jesus was considered a prophet by Islamic tradition. Right? And in the Old Testament, of course, we don't have a Jesus character. And so the New Testament and Christianity give us this access to a personal relationship in a way, from my perspective, that other faiths do not. Right? And again, this is at least from my own understanding. And again, I'm in my own exploration of this. I'm not claiming to be the world's leading expert. But it's an important piece, right? It is an important piece that we are able to build a relationship with another human being that is God on earth, because that is the way that we are accustomed to relating relationally. And so people feel that they can have a personal relationship with Christ because he has a face. He is depicted as opposed to God. And so, Christ was known to have said, I am the way. Now, I believe that what Christ was saying on one hand was, what I am here to teach is the way to build a relationship with God. This is the way. I am going to teach you the way. But I also believe that Christ was intimating that a personal relationship is important. And in order to have a personal relationship, God has to be represented in person. and Christ was there for that representation. So that is an important role that I believe Christ plays in accessing the personal relationship with God. And I believe a personal relationship with God, or the God of your own understanding, is essential if you really want to move on to the next level of your personal growth, because you have to be able to turn things over to something greater than you. And in personal growth, we generally don't have that. That's what we find when we get to spirituality or when we get to religion. Now, an interesting point here is whether or not Christ was the Son of God, or whether there even is a God, or there's an argument that believing that there is very, very empowering, that there could be a placebo effect, right? And we understand this from psychology and neurophysiology and neurobiology. We understand that the brain is a goal-achieving machine. And so if you actually believe that there is a loving God, whether there is a loving God or not, you will be showing up differently in your life, and you will prove yourself to be true. Whether there was a Christ and you or not, and you believe that believing in Christ and having loving devotion to Christ is the way to a personal relationship with God, and having a relationship with God will afford you benefit. Well, like Henry Ford said, the man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are right. So you're right. There certainly could be a placebo effect to even believing in any of the things that I'm talking about on this episode. Now, my personal belief is in a creator God. I believe I'm truly developing a personal relationship with that creator God through my practices. But ultimately, what I'm seeing right now is a phenomenon of personal growth enthusiasts moving into a personal relationship with God and also accepting Jesus into their life. We saw it recently with Candace Owens. We saw it with Russell Brand. Now, that said, there's a big difference between reclaiming a relationship with Christ and actually wanting to live as Christ recommends we live. Those are two very, very different things. So there's a lot of people turning back to God, or turning back to Christianity, or turning back to Christ. But the integration piece, in other words, doing as Christ told us to do, is actually the most important part from my perspective. Again, this is not a part of the conversation of whether Christ died for our sins, or even what that means, or whether he is the only way, but just an explanation of what I found to be true for me. So I hope you found this episode beneficial for you. If you've been in an inquiry around whether or not this is important, or what role Christ plays, or can you believe in the universe, or just believe in God? I hope my perspectives have been beneficial to you. And if you love this episode, do me a favor. If you're listening on the audio platforms, leave me a review. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, drop me a comment. I try to read all of them and respond to as many of them as I can. And again, if you want to go a little bit deeper, I have another episode on the Jesus question finally answered, one of the earlier episodes that I've ever recorded. Also have an episode around my journaling practice that has brought me into a more personal relationship with the God of my own understanding. And I also have some fantastic episodes on how to create from the fourth dimension. Again, going back to Neville Goddard and the wish fulfilled. So love you. Thank you for being here with me on this episode. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Hey, it's David. Hop on over to davidbear.com. Click right here. There's also a link in the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter. You'll get immediate access to my free Mind Hack ebook, as well as a couple of trainings to help you master the inner game. This is a great way to stay informed and be a part of our community and be notified of special announcements. Click below, head on over to the website, get subscribed. If you loved this video, make sure you check out this one or this one, and I will see you in the next video.